Random thoughts. This is another random thoughts video, and in this video, I'm going to react to a comment that somebody left me in the video I did about Africans before colonial times, or the idea that Africans before colonial times just ate, danced, and slept, and they did not do anything else. And of course, in that video, I explained that that's a very erroneous and misleading we can say impression. It's not based on reality because actual history shows that Africans did more than just dance, eat, and sleep. They ran Commonwealth societies that were very well structured. They did farming. They kept animals and bred animals to thousands of animals. Sometimes, or some individuals have 10,000, 20,000 heads of cattle. They went into trading, the long distance trading. I've read a document by Richard Burton, I think, where he talks about the Somalis, for example, doing very long distance trading, uh, taking goods to very, very far lands and such kind of stuff. So they did a lot more. Like we can just say Africans were just like any other society, but um, maybe immediately before, during colonial times, of course, and even after colonial times, there is an impression that has been created, or that impression of Africans just eating, dancing, and sleeping has been created and has been shared a lot and has been built and propped, and it's for a reason. Now, coming back to the comment I'm talking about, the comment I'm reacting to, somebody said that such narratives are told because they have a use, and I agree they have a very, very, very good use. Now, here is something that most of us, or many of us, never think about. We always never think about colonization and the justification of colonization, because for many of us, we think the Europeans who came to Africa and subdivided the continent and decided that they were going to have this part and this part for this country and this part and this part for this country, maybe France, or the French, the British, and the Germans, and the Belgians, and all those other groups that colonized Africa. We always think that they did not realize that it wasn't the right thing to do. They did actually recognize that it was not the right thing, or at least there needed to be a justification, and that's very important. There needed to be a justification, because often when you occupy other people's lands, there is a justification. Often it is that maybe they fought with you, they were your enemies during a particular war, and you defeated them. Then you ended up colonizing their land, or taking their land, or occupying their land and controlling the population. Often that's what happens. Now come to Africa. Africans did not wrong the Europeans in any way. There was no way that Africans wronged the Europeans. Africans did not go to war with the Europeans over anything. They did not. Africans were just living their lives, and then the Europeans show up and they are like, we are going to colonize this land. Now, even during that time, which is 19th century, they recognize that there is a problem with this, there is a problem with this, there is a legal problem with it, and there is a moral issue with it. They knew that. If you read a few documents, you come to the conclusion that they actually knew that there was something wrong about coming to Africa and just subdividing the land and colonizing it. And they tried to cure some of that in many ways. And one way they try to cure at least the legal part. There is the legal part and the moral part. Now let's talk about the legal part first, and then we look at how they try to cure the legal issues of colonization, and then how they try to cure the moral issue about colonization. Now, when it comes to the legal part, they try to cure it by having these very weird, we can say, treaties signed by Africans and the Europeans. And often the people who came to seek those signatures were mostly people from private companies. In Kenya, of course, we know the East Africa Imperial British Company is the company that came, and then its representatives were moving around meeting so-called chiefs even though most Africans in East Africa, in the East Africa Protectorate, which they call later, which is Kenya today, there were hardly any people who were called chiefs or even something close to chief. Often they were just senates, council of elders, and speakers of council of elders. There was nothing like a chief. There were few commonwealths that had that powerful person. For example, the kingdom of, we can say, Mumia, the Nambongo Mumia. That one had one strong Nambongo Mumia, strong person. Same case to Buganda. Of course, they had a king. And maybe you can talk of Zanzibar and Mombasa. They had the sultans that were that one strong man. But then the rest of the land, there was nothing like a chief. There were mostly republics that were, we can say, ran through senates. But now these companies, they come to Africa, and I'm using Kenya as an example because what happened here, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, is more or less the same thing that happened in the rest of Africa. These people who represented these private companies, they come and they entice some of the people. And there is, I read a document where there is a story told of how some of these representatives of these companies will basically appoint chiefs themselves. They will appoint some guy, some random guy they meet, they befriend him, and then they make him the chief of these people, and then they have them sign these documents on behalf of the other people or the rest of or his people. And then that, of course, that document is then used to claim that, you know, now we've been given rights to use this land. And they went around doing that around the place. And by the end of it, they went to the UK and said, you know, we've acquired the right to use the entire land of East Africa. That's East Africa, Kenya, Uganda today, most that. And the Germans said something similar, of course, going on in Tanganyika. And now, when you start questioning how did they get signatures that cover the entire land, they did not actually. They were just picking one here, one there, one there. And if one individual, often a guy they picked and befriended, signed a document, it's very difficult to determine what size of land was this person giving up by signing this document, because even most of them did not know what they were signing really. They were being told, oh, here there is a shuka here, just press your finger on this piece of paper, and they think it's some playing something like that. And they've given up rights to a land which they don't even know how big that land is, because there was a clash of societies, a clash of language and things like that. Most Africans had their own ways of establishing contracts. It was not pressing your finger on a piece of paper. Often it was about maybe killing a sheep or a goat and doing some rituals, and that's how you establish a contract. But now these people come with their own way of doing contracts, and they don't explain to these people that this is actually what you are doing. You are doing what others could call muma in some languages, like you are basically taking an oath of some sorts. They did not understand that, but they were tricked into giving these signatures. So they basically tricked many people to give up land through these dubious documents. And that's how they were trying to cure the legal aspect of colonization. So colonization was not just a matter of a British walking in and being like, now I manage this land. They understood there were legal issues and there were moral issues. Now the legal issues, that's how they tried to cure them. Now let's go to the how they try to cure the moral aspect of colonization. Now, I think if you ask me, how they try to cure the moral aspect of it is worse than how they cure the legal aspect. The moral aspect of it stays with us to date. Of course, even the legal way they did it, of course, somehow stays with us to date. But I think the way they try to cure the moral issue about it is worse. And I'm going to tell you how it's worse. Now, they've handled the legal part. Now they come to the moral part. Because remember, there were also people in Europe who were not comfortable with it. And I've said it in other videos. Sometimes we assume that because it was British who came and colonized East Africa, for example, all British citizens, including politicians and business people and everybody, agreed with that decision. Not actually, no. There was a sizable amount or section of the population in these countries, be it Britain, Great Britain, be it France, be it Germany, be it Belgium, all of them. There was a sizable section of the population in these countries that did not think it was the right thing to do. They thought it was not okay, both legally and morally. Now, the people, the colonialists, the people who believed in going and colonizing Africa, had to justify to these people of course, legally and morally. Now, how they went about curing the moral issue about it is this. This is how they did it. They went and told these people, those people are uncivilized. They really need us to, they are at a lower level of human development. And in fact, when you read most of these documents, that line comes up a lot. They are at a lower level of human development. That was a line that was used a lot. And it might seem like a simple line, but it's a very, very, very powerful line. Because by saying they are at a lower level of human development, they were basically saying they have the potential to grow to reach our level at some point, but they're not going to do it by themselves. That was the second layer of the argument, of course. They need our help. They need us to go there, give them education, expand their thinking capacity and things like that. And even then, they still argue that these people were too they like using the emotion side of be excited and things like that, that they are too emotionally unstable for them to manage their affairs, for them to run things. So they need our calm um, capability to help them with that, to manage some things on behalf, because they might never be able to do that. And we are also helping them to try to raise them up a little bit in human development. So that's how they did it. And for them to do that, they needed to disqualify and to dismiss a lot of things that Africans were doing at that point. For example, they needed to dismiss that Africans had any form of government organization. At least they needed to disqualify that Africans were capable of organizing themselves in republics. That had to go. And while most African societies, especially in Kenya and even Tanzania, and even in Uganda, actually, if you remove Buganda Kingdom, Bunyoro, Kitara, those kingdoms, the rest of the people were republics. And here is something that I always say. While monarchies are beautiful political organizations, I think republics are a better political organization. And here is why. Today, every country is trying to run to decentralization of powers, separation of powers. Like we don't want one part of government holding all the power. Why is that? Because all of us recognize that we humans become very corrupted with power. We've become, every human, almost every person, if they are given too much power, they are likely to be corrupted with that power, and they are likely to act in ways that are not is not a good thing for the rest of the members of the Commonwealth. So when you decentralize power, and then you don't have one individual with power, but then power again is not let to go into the natural state of humans where the strongest overcome the weak. That's the most beautiful organization of government, where protocol is supreme, is the law that is supreme, is protocol that is supreme, is not man who is supreme, so that all of us are equal before that protocol. And then there is justice for all of us in that protocol. That's how most Africans lived. We lived in republics where there were laws, customs, and ways how everything was done. It was not a decision to be made by a single person that this is what I've said should happen. No, it used to be, this is how things are done. This is the customs. This, when this happens, this is how it should be cured. When that happens, this is how people should act, or this is what it needs to be done. That's how most of African societies existed. They were republics. Now in Europe, in the 19th century, almost 90% or over 90% of the Commonwealth were, of course, monarchies. But still, they celebrated republics. They celebrated the ancient Roman Republic, and most scholars in those countries believe that the Roman Republic was at the pinnacle of how government is organized. So they knew that republics were actually the thing. Now, but come to Africa, very few of them will accept that these people are running republics. They don't mention it. They just say, oh, those people are, they just live like savages. And they will say, for example, where they come close to recognizing that there's a structure for of managing things, for example, the Senate, they will call them Council of Elders to cheapen them. Instead of saying, oh, they are military or they are soldiers, they will cheapen them to be warriors. And warriors sounds like these people who are just after war. There's no plan, nothing. They just animalistic in a way. So that's what they did. Now, there was a need, there was a desperate need among colonialists to make Africans savages, undeveloped, uncivilized, not intelligent enough. And that's because they needed to justify their colonization, especially when it came to the moral part about it. So that's why when you look at all these documents, they needed to do that. They desperately needed to do that because there were people back at home and not just home. In the US, for example, during that time, people will question, is it really right for you to just walk into other people's land and occupy it, people who have not done anything wrong to you, and just occupy their land and claim to have a right to use that land? Is that proper? And they will be like, you know what? We signed some treaties with their chiefs and they gave us that right. And again, they're like, Israeli, they're like, you know what? These people need us. They are at a very low level of human development and they need us to help them. And colonization is good for them. And actually, that's how it is said often in those documents that colonization is good for the African. They don't talk of exploiting the land, exploiting the Africans' labor. No, that's not mentioned. It's good for them. And most people bought it actually. And now the saddest part is that even Africans bought it and they came to believe that they did not have organized societies. They did not have structures in place. They were not civilized. They just lived like animals. That's the most unfortunate part. So yeah, so there is a reason why that narrative had to be spread, had to be propped up, had to be built. Yeah, there is a reason. It needed to justify the moral part of colonization. Those are my random thoughts.